Fusion rifles. You can't live with them. You can't live without them. I have dived into the abyss that is fusion rifles, and today I'm going to rank all 18 non-sunset versions of them with respect to PvP. I've learned so much to this point that I'm probably going to make a standalone video showing just how much depth there are to these things, because I had no idea until this year. More importantly, they are so different now compared to before the major changes that came this season that if you stick around till the end, you're going to learn some core concepts on all the archetypes, as well as the unique roles to chase and which ones you should stay away from. Let's jump right in and start off with a really good one named Plug 1. It actually has an adept version, which gives you those 3 usual benefits, right? The stat bonus whenever you masterwork, the extra mods that are available within the mod slot, which by the way, Bungie did fix the adept charge mod. It no longer reduces your damage, so that's nice. And then of course, the final bit being that second perk that comes in one of those last 2 columns. For this case, the Plug 1 comes with the Bottomless Grief. This is a precision frame fusion archetype. Right off the bat, it's a popular one because of this archetype, and the reason is that the horizontal spread gets converted to more of a vertical spread. While Guardians are a lot taller than they are wide, right? So it's really nice that a precision frame converts some of the horizontal aspects of that spread to be more vertical to help you hit your 5 bolts. Now, another general aspect about precision frames is the fact that they like to have a mix of both range and stability. Like you're going to learn later on that some archetypes really favor stability and others really favor range, but these ones like to have a mix. The rabbit hole I talked about earlier on how I wanted to make a standalone video was because there's a lot of things on fusion rifles that are kind of like these core mechanic altering perks. You've got accelerated coils, which cuts back the charge time, meaning you get to shoot your shot faster, but you're going to do a little bit less damage. You've got liquid coils, which basically does the exact opposite of that. You have a charge masterwork sometimes. That one's similar to accelerated coils, but it has 10 different levels, right? Then sometimes you have a perk called backup plan, which is like accelerated coils on steroids. Then you have the fact that all of these things can stack, and it's really just a complete black hole of time and knowledge. So for that reason, in this video, I'm going to kind of give you the Coles notes on every archetype as we go through them and what to stay away from or what you should chase. But other than that, we'll leave it there. For the Plug 1, for example, let's take liquid coils. I would never really recommend this. You do enough damage that you're always going to get your kill with 5 bolts out of those 7. If you slot in liquid coils to do 2% more damage, that's not going to give you the opportunity to kill people with 4 bolts. So it's sort of like a wasted perk and just adding more charge time, which means you're taking longer to get your shot off. Some would say that it's worth it if you pair it with Kickstart, which is another perk in the final column, because that also adds damage. So when you get that stacking, you can make that work. But that one has its own parameters that it's got to follow. So just in general, I'm going to say don't worry too much about liquid coils. Stay away from backup plan. And then for accelerated coils or the charge masterwork, those are great. If you do one of them, for example, you can cut your charge time and maintain your 5 bolt kill for almost all of the resilience levels. Plug 1 is honestly an all-around solid pick. I started off with a good one, and I'm ranking this one A tier. Trinary system is what you call an adaptive frame. So that means it shoots a little bit faster when it comes to charge time, but it's at the cost of slightly less damage and range. Specifically, these ones shoot 7 bolts and also typically need 5 to kill most resilience levels. So on paper, it seems like why would you ever use a precision over these? But the main reason people tend to gravitate towards precisions is a feeling of consistency. Even the zoom is lower at 15 compared to what a Plug 1 can get at 17. Combination of all of those things make this particular adaptive a little bit less convenient, so it's definitely not an A tier, but it does have a few things going for it. Now, if I was to talk about those rabbit hole perks, we'll call them that going forward, I guess, the ones that kind of alter the core mechanic of the weapon. Backup plan, don't ever use it on this archetype. You're just going to decimate the damage. Liquid coil is kind of a waste unless you combine it with the charge masterwork, I guess. All in all, you're just better off picking other items such as particle repeater or projection fuse to try and get your range and stability up there. This specific weapon does come with a lot of perks, and that's good and mostly bad. I've done a video in the past sharing an RNG calculator, and let me tell you, this one does not bode well. I really like the roll of surplus and tap the trigger. That's a wonderful combo when you pair it with projection fuse and a range masterwork, because it's a decent boost in range, it's a decent boost in handling, and then when you have that tap the trigger, the stability is really solid. Like if I was to rate that exact roll right there, I would actually probably rate this one decent. The main problem is that anyone who goes to get this weapon is going to get so many awful versions of it. We ended up rating this one C tier overall. And if you don't believe me on just how difficult it is to get a decent roll of this weapon to do well, join the Discord and ping somebody named Gilly. Ask him how many Gambit matches he has played to get this roll. Moving on, we have the Zealot's Reward. This is a cool one. The fusion that I didn't even know existed until a Twitter clip from True Vanguard showed up on my feed. It's a rapid fire archetype, and these got a massive buff in the big fusion patch. They shoot 9 bolts instead of 7 and deal just shy of 30 damage per bolt, meaning you need 7 of them to hit in order to get your kill. For the rapids, when you're talking about those rabbit hole perks, there are some unique combinations. Backup plan or liquid coil on their own are kind of bad. If you have 1 accelerated or 1 charge masterwork, it's not too bad, but it's considered safer to just go for stability boosting perks. Bungie reminded us in their TWAB that rapids rely heavily on stability, so always keep that in mind whenever you're choosing your perks. Now that being said, I said all of those things alone weren't really worth it. But sometimes you can actually stack these things, and a wildly fun combo is when I paired accelerated coil with a charged masterwork alongside under pressure and high impact reserves. If you're really nuts, you could probably do all 3, like backup plan to drop the charge rate, accelerated coils to drop the charge rate, charge masterwork to drop the charge rate, knowing that you're never going to get a 1-tap and you're always just going to get your 2 bursts in like super fast. But for me, the killer combo was accelerated coil with a charge masterwork and using that under pressure for that extra damage from that perk. Do not sleep on these archetypes. I had an absolute blast with this roll. The biggest takeaway is that if you're an aggressive player, look for one of these with under pressure and do not dismantle it. Give it a shot. I promise you'll enjoy it. Zealot's Reward nearly made it to A tier, but we ended up going with B, and you're going to see why later. Okay, Coriolis, this is going to be quick. Remember how I said precision frames are really cool because their horizontal bolt spread pattern, whatever, is kind of converted to be more vertical? Well, this sucker fires 7 in a straight line east-west, the exact opposite. You will almost certainly miss the 2 outliers on the 2 sides, meaning you better get lucky with the middle 5. Spoiler alert, it doesn't happen that much in PvP unless you barrel stuff the opponent, which I guess is fitting for its name. That's right, this one is the only aggressive frame in the game, and it sucks. If I had to recommend a roll, I'd probably say moving target with rangefinder for more zoom, maybe a range masterwork, and then heck, maybe even liquid coils to 4-bolt people who are really low resilience. But either way, for this ranking, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna actually use a clip from a good friend of mine named Wallah.
But this thing is really bad. And I'm not over exaggerating either when I say this thing's probably one of the worst weapons I've ever used in my life.
And before we touch the high impact archetypes, I did want to cover the timeline's vertex. I talked earlier about how adaptive frames were a happy medium kind of between precisions and rapids, but the Trinary had its own problems for C tier, right? Well, timelines is very unique because of the zoom options. This is another adaptive, and it has different options for optics that affect the zoom on the weapon. This is always a fun thing whenever we get this on weapons, and I'm not kidding, this one can go from a base 15 zoom all the way up to 21. If you didn't hear that right, that's from 15 to 21. Now, to hold back on that excitement a little bit, I actually won't recommend cranking it up all the way to the end. Torch scope is probably the best middle ground, which will land you right around the 18 zoom, but even 19 is pretty solid. This is well above the other adaptives, and it's still perfectly manageable in those uptight scenarios. Remembering that adaptives like a mix of both range and stability, well, the beauty is that the torch scope, for example, adds 12 range and a bunch of zoom, so it allows you to go for something like particle repeater, adding a bunch of stability, then using the community favorite perk firmly planted to just have ultimate amounts of stability. Directly quoting my buddy Ivan about firmly planted, he says, this perk makes your recoil go to a perfect 100, it adds 20 stability, 30 handling, it cuts your accuracy cone by 40%, it slows the cone growth by 17%, has 80% better delayed recoil, it cooks your dinner, and it'll take your damn kids to school. End quote. Honestly, a lot of fusions come with that perk. I just couldn't help but read that message out loud because of what he wrote. Elemental Capacitor in the final column is probably what I'd recommend because it's just so fun, and it really does vary on whatever subclass that you're rocking, but this is a really slept on fusion. Timeline's Vertex is a perfect example of how an adaptive frame can be an A tier fusion. All right, let's get back to that high impact frame we wanted to talk about. The Exile's Curse from Trials of Osiris. The perk pool is different now, so there's some special rolls floating around out there that you can't get anymore. For example, that amazing perk that I just read to you, Firmly Planted, it no longer rolls on it. Sweet, thank you for that, Bungie. I'm so grateful that you've given us Pulse Monitor. Now I'm gonna go slay in the Crucible left, right, and center. In all seriousness, high impacts have the slowest charge time, like real slow. It literally takes a full second to shoot this thing. They shoot 5 bolts instead of the 7 or 9, and you usually need to hit 4 out of those 5 to secure your kill. Tick rate can make that a little tough, and you'd be surprised how many times you only hit 3 though. Now, a lot of people forget that this archetype also gives you an advantage while standing still. In my opinion, if you're going to alter the charge time, you have 2 main options. Number 1, you actually make it a hair slower. With liquid coils, you're going to slow it down by about 4%. And what that does is it allows you to 3-bolt the lower resilience level guardians out there. And you can definitely notice a difference with consistency. I think it kills 4, but not quite 5 resil, but don't quote me on that. I can't really remember. Option number 2 with these things, which is more of what I would recommend, is actually stacking up as much of the charge time killers as you can. Throw on backup plan with either accelerated coils or the charge masterwork. You don't need to use all 3. You can just use backup plan plus 1 of those, but that's what I would be looking for. You can still kill most resilience levels with 4 bolts, but it's sort of like converting your 1000 millisecond high impact charge rate into an adaptive. That being said, we actually rated this one C tier. It simply doesn't have the versatility that all of your other fusion rifles have in today's meta, and there's a better high impact out there anyway. Moving on, we have the Dreambreaker. This is another adaptive, and yeah, I know we've done a few of them so far. There are more of these than the other archetypes, and a random thought just popped in my head. I'm kind of curious, do you guys like these types of skins? Like if you had the option to choose between this one and say the Zealot's reward skin, what would you pick? Like which one do you think looks better? Anyway, this one is right in the middle of the pack. It's not bad by any means. It can roll Eye of the Storm, which I believe to be one of the top perks in the entire game. Plus, it's got Firmly Planted, which we've already talked about. But then when you compare it to timelines, for example, it just can't quite get there. Probably the best way to explain this ranking is think worse than the timelines, but 90% of the rolls that you're going to get on this will actually be better than what you usually get on the Trinary, given the perk pool and obtainability across that side. And although I don't think it holds up to an under pressure Zealots, at base this one still belongs in the B tier. Next up we have Bastion. Right, this mother exotic. This thing was the bane of my existence. I might get hate for this next comment, but it needs to be said. I am always open to everyone's perspectives. I mean, why wouldn't I be, right? Hearing other sides of the coin can only enlighten me to try and make me better going forward. But this one, it's something that kept driving me nuts. You see, so many people always use a weapon's usage rate to determine its strength. Obviously, you're not going to see the worst weapons at the top of the food chain when it comes to usage rates, but there are always outliers, and Bastion was one of them. This was hands down one of the most powerful weapons in the game, and the only reason it wasn't at the top for usage rates is because people forget that fun factor plays a massive role in that statistic. For some, yeah, this weapon was super fun. Of course, there's going to be people out there that enjoy it, but for the masses, this wasn't really the case. And I have to tip my hat to Bungie for recognizing its strength, even though the usage rates weren't that bad. They were certainly trending upwards as shotguns got nerfed, but Bungie recognized what needed to be done, and then they ended up tweaking it. For those that don't know, this exotic has a fairly slow charge time, but it always leaves a lot of room for error. It shoots sort of like these 3 slug-like bolts of fusion at your opponent, so if you miss one, you're okay. Like I said, there's room for error because you can be off target and then get back on target while it's shooting the 3 things and still get your kill. I know this was really popular on controller as well, but there's a fine line when it comes to balancing weapons, and I think Bungie hit it a little bit too hard. My honest rating of this weapon right now, at least on mouse and keyboard, is D tier. It's certainly ahead of Coriolis, I guess, but it is not a C tier with respect to what else is going to end up in that category by the end of the video. My guess is Bungie's a little afraid to tweak it too much and then have it skyrocket to S tier again. Null Composure, right, the one that my fire team always tells me to put on when I'm going against Atheon, right? I do what I'm told, folks. This one's actually a static roll. Couldn't pay me to know when or how I got it. I'm really bad for those kinds of details, but let's just talk base stats. Compared to the other two rapids in the game, it's got a middle of the pack range, decent stability, but no real wiggle room, right? Since it's more of a static roll. You can't really make this special in PvP chasing for all those perks that you can have on other types of rapids. I will point out that if you pair heating up with reservoir burst situational damage, you can chain some pretty solid kill streaks in 6s. Like, this is not something I would take into trials, but for quick play, you can actually have a lot of fun with it. That being said, given the fact it has almost no versatility with respect to rolls, we ended up rating this one C tier. High impact number 2 for the day is Glacioclasm. Did I say that right? I know I say everything wrong. We've talked plenty about what to look for across all of the archetypes, so the video will start to speed up at this point, I promise. But what I wanted to point out is that this one can roll under pressure. It's got the best zoom out of the 3 high impacts. It has cracked out base stats with stability that can cross 60, and on this kind of frame with range that can reach nearly 100 range. Now remember with Exiles, I talked about how if you run liquid coils, you can start to 3-bolt people. Well, on Glacio, if you pair liquid coils with high impact reserves and under pressure, you can start to do the 3-bolt a lot more consistently. The way I see it with these things is that if I'm using a high impact frame, I'm going to need to play a very specific way. I won't say it. I have to be perfectly planned and methodically slow with my gameplay, I find. So if I'm going to do that, this is the fusion I'm going to pick for that role. Glacioclasm is without a doubt an A tier fusion rifle. All right, you know what? We're on the up and up with some of these rankings, so let's talk about the main ingredient. What's his face just sold an incredible roll recently, like within the past month. It's not a god roll in my opinion, but it's probably one of the best ones that you're gonna find, and I really hope you did pick it up. This fusion is the bee's knees, the cat's pajamas, whatever you want to call it. It can reach 100 stability. It can reach mid 80s for range. That might not quite compare to the plug one when it comes to range, but the point is that it's the right archetype. It's got the right stat mix and the perfect combinations for perks. There's nothing more you really need to ask for in a fusion, and I'm going to bring you down the rabbit hole again just to be clear. On precisions, remember that things like accelerated coils or the charge masterwork can help you bring that charge time down. I'm not a big fan of the 740 milliseconds, so I do what I can to maintain my 5-bolt kill, but get as quick of a charge as I can. If you choose to combine those, you can still take down the majority of Guardians at most resilience levels with the 5-bolt hit out of the 7 that it'll shoot. And if you use the red dot scope, which I recommend the 2 MOA, that'll get your zoom up to 17 and you're dancing. All in all, think plug 1, but it has that one extra elite level layer if you get the right roll, ascending it to an S tier. Firmly planted with tap the trigger is one of the best combinations I've ever used, and this thing is just an absolute consistency king. Let's see, we have the Techeun Force. This is a standard adaptive that doesn't deserve A or S, but I did want to point out a few things. First off, it has rangefinder, so it can gain an edge in the zoom department. It rolls with under pressure, which is pretty cool. But the real reason I wanted to talk to you about this is the fact that it comes with kill clip and rampage that you can combine. Seriously, to anyone who has this, check your vault right now. If you have this exact roll with kill clip and rampage, go into quick play immediately. You have an adaptive frame, which means a quicker charge rate that can kill with only 4 out of the 7 bolts. Admittedly, this is a niche little slaying machine in 6s after a kill, but for that reason and the fact that it's pretty special, I am actually putting it a hair above the Trinary simply because of its perk pool being so small. As a result, we all agreed that this one would be B tier. Hey, quick side note, it is my job to make these videos entertaining enough for you to watch them through, so I just wanted to say thanks. You're awesome, and if you ever have any feedback, please reach out to me. Liking, sharing, all of that good stuff goes a really long way for the channel, so I want to make sure that I keep improving over time. Okay, on to the Iota Draconis. This is a pretty cool name. It's a new addition and it comes with some of those flashy new perks. It's a high impact frame that can roll the likes of Adagio. Yes, that's right, not Adiago Castle. For the love of God, pronounce it right. I know I've made 3 jokes about that, but for my fract this video, you guys tore me apart. It can roll Harmony, it can roll Kickstart, Cornered, Frenzy. There's a whole schwack of fun perks on this thing. This video isn't really the time or place to dive into what all of those are specifically. I guarantee someone like Fallout already has. Go to his video to learn more about those, but for this fusion, it ain't it, chief. Maybe the 3 different rolls tested weren't enough, but it just does not go well. If I had to recommend something, I'd probably go with those typical rabbit hole perks that I described when I talked about high impacts earlier, like stacking as much as you can to get your charge time down. Harmony is pretty special because after I get my primary kill, I can swap to this knowing that I've got that extra damage boost again, so I can just absolutely map someone. Even with all of that though, we ended up rating this one D tier. Okay, Cartesian coordinate. Maybe I've been living under a rock, but I feel like this is the most slept on fusion in the game. I talked a lot earlier about how Rapid's got a massive buff this season, and yes, Zealot is beautiful, but this one is just objectively better in my opinion. Remember, Bungie confirmed that Rapids rely heavily on stability, right? Like the polar opposite of high impacts that love range. Well, the Cartesian gives you different scopes, kind of like that Timelines one. Remember that one? Well, this one you can have different scopes to give you more zoom, giving you the benefits of range overall within Destiny's gameplay. And that in turn allows you to chase stability perks, because this is a rapid fire in column 2 in the masterwork. You 100% want under pressure. I know I've recommended that perk a lot, but seriously, with Rapids, like full stop, this is a game-changing perk for this archetype. In the 4th column, you have a lot of options. Some people like Thresh because of the super boost, but I've made a video on that one showing just how truly small that amount is, so I don't really recommend it. High impact reserves helps with your consistency. Do not go for backup plan unless you go to the dark side and pile that up with accelerated or a charged masterwork for those intentional 2 taps. Vorpal is pretty unique on this. You'd be surprised how quick you can put a super down. You can't one-shot them, but I've caught them off guard shooting them with 2 bursts very fast. Swashbuckler, on the other hand, can make this thing go crazy. If you're a hyper aggressive player like I am and you get the right roll on a rapid fire such as this, I could not believe some of the stuff I was pulling with this when you get the right roll. We nearly went with S tier on this one, but the mere fact that you must have that perfect scenario like I talked about in order to kind of compete with something like that main ingredient at base, it just doesn't quite have that versatility, so we ended up ranking this one in the A tier. Next up is Hollow Words. Do me a favor, look at the clock on this video. There's still time left. Yes, we will be covering the exotics, don't worry. The Hollow Words is, I actually struggled to rank this one. It can reach similar range to the main ingredient. It has better zoom than it, but the base stability is so bad. I can't believe how much you notice when your stability is below 50 on this thing. Like right out the gate, the plug and main ingredient just have flat out 10 more. So you need to put all of your perks on this one towards stability just to even get to their level. Normally that would be a good example of trade-off, but where the Hollow Word starts to fall flat is the fact it doesn't have any killer combos that just make you excited about using this in the Crucible. I'd probably end up recommending Vorpal and just using it as a swappable if the team's about to pop their supers, but even on that front, you're better off just using a DMT with Vorpal anyways. We ended up rating this one in the C tier. All right, the final 3, all exotics. I'm actually going to rip through all of them and then just smash their rankings into the table all at once. For Merciless, I sincerely want to know what people's first impressions are of this thing. One day I hate this thing so much, and then another day I love it. I don't understand. This thing is so strange. Like, no joke, you guys. I almost rated this thing D tier. I just said the word thing like 15,000 times. Sorry about that. But some of the streaks that you can go on, some of the predictability on it is like no other. To clarify, what I mean is that it feels like it just has such a tight spread sometimes. Like, you know you've got the kill from a mile away. And that's a good thing, right? That's kind of like rewarding good aim. You're either going to hit all of your bolts or you're going to hit none of them, which, by the way, it has 5 bolts. But then you'll go to bed, you'll wake up the next day, you'll hop on, and all of a sudden this thing becomes the weapon form of the melee whiff that we've been dealing with for 7 years in Destiny. It is so odd how inconsistently consistent it is. Anyways, the exotic perk is kind of weird. When you get damage hits without killing someone, it'll charge and reload faster after the fact. When you get that to ramp up, it's quite impressive, but typically if you're gonna miss, you're dead. And I will add one more thing. The catalyst is basically a make or break. It adds 36 range and 36 stability, which just makes this a completely different gun. So if you don't have the catalyst, like, don't even use this thing in PvP. How about Telesto? What do I even say? I feel like there's no amount of memery I could even write down that would do this thing justice. So I'll just say 2 things. No, let's make it 3. Number 1, if you don't know what Telesto is, after this video, I want you to just start YouTubing Telesto because it's going to fill your afternoon with hilarious, ridiculous things. Number 2, it has officially gone sentient and there's nothing that Bungie nor humanity can do to stop this thing. And number 3, it's actually stupidly good in PvP. People always rack it up for the memes, but it's actually really solid. Do yourself a favor and drop the shotgun for a bit to go have fun with this thing. PS, that video clip was done by someone by the name of DFlawless. He's a wonderful human being. I highly recommend checking him out. He's currently on Facebook, I think, and he's got a TikTok that's growing really fast. I'll put his info down below. Jotunn, the actual memery of an exotic. I will never forget this comment I got on a video. For context, I made a Titan exotic tier list for PvP, all 30 plus of them. And in the Phoenix Cradle section, I talked about sunspots. Well, I swear I've never had so many Jotunn comments on my future videos ever since that day. It's been an absolute delight. I'm afraid to inform you though that I cannot sign off on this video accepting that this weapon is usable in PvP. It simply isn't. Don't hate me. I guess I should say a few things about it though. For those that are unaware, it sends a projectile, not hit scan, and if you happen to hit your opponent, you'll jump with joy because you're going to get your kill. It detonates on impact, and the explosion that it leaves behind will tick 7 times over 2 seconds. So yeah, it sounds really cool, but trust me, go use this thing and you will not have a good time. Now let's slap these 3 exotics into the list just like this. And there you have it, the full ranking of all 18 non-sunset fusion rifles in this season's meta, because no, I am not including the Vex Mythoclast. Obviously, that one is a thing of its own.